Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and in today's video, I shall be debating whether or not there ought to be quotas for women in certain professions. So the motion is this House would introduce quotas for women in certain professions. Right, so obviously I'll start off as being the proposition, and Madam President has introduced me. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I propose that quotas be introduced for women in certain professions for the following reasons: to end gender discrimination, because we need female talent, because the free market is not free at the moment, and because it has worked elsewhere. So first of all, let me set out the paradigm. What are quotas? Well, that's saying that because women are 51% of the population, they live slightly longer than men, so they're 51%, that we ought to, in certain occupations, for instance, banking, say that they must be at least a particular percentage of the workforce and set deadlines. So we're not saying there have to be 51% of people in banking, but we're going to say there have to be 40%, because for various reasons, perhaps not so many women want to go in there right now. And we're not going to say that a bank must employ 40% of people, 40% of its employees must be women today. We give them a deadline of, say, 10 years with a fine if they don't. In banking, and obviously it can't just be the most junior people, can't be just the bank clerks, but the managers and the people in investment banking and so forth. And there are other occupations where women are underrepresented, such as engineering, accountancy and so forth. And setting a 40% quota and a time limit in order to bring this into effect. Right, we're not doing it in all occupations, particularly ones where women are almost 50% or well over 50%, such as teaching. All right, so discrimination. Well, what is it? We're talking about unfair discrimination, telling people apart on an unfair basis. You're a man, so we'll give you this a job. You're a woman, so we won't give you the job. You're in the occupation. You're a man, so we'll promote you. You're a woman, so we won't. You're a man, so you ask for a pay rise, you'll get it. You're a woman, so you ask for it, you don't get it. Things like that. There is gender prejudice. Many psychological studies would show this. I don't think there's a single study which shows that no gender prejudice exists. So people are conditioned to believe boys do this, girls do that. Boys given things to play with like remote control cars, Legos, that leads them towards engineering, towards STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and management, and this leads to the higher paid occupations. So the best paid professions in the financial services and so forth are overwhelmingly occupied by men, and that's why men tend to earn more money. Sometimes there's performance-related pay, and it's not, the pay isn't given out on a objective basis. It's really who the managers prefer, who they socialise with, who they play golf with, who they go to the pub with, who they even go to lap dancing bars. For understandable reasons, women tend not to engage in these activities quite so much. Sometimes feel very gauche if they did. So we need female talent, because women have half the brain power, and they would do more for us in the financial services, in politics likewise. We could have a quota, we could reserve at least 40% of the seats in any legislature for women, in law and so on, as lawyers, not just ordinary ones, the highest flying ones, judges and so. We must have, so forth, must have a female viewpoint on the judiciary, with having parity with a male viewpoint. So our so-called free market is not free at the moment because of the prejudices I just outlined, because of unfair questions in job interviews. I know they're illegal, but they happen. A young woman I knew, she'd recently married, and in an interview the guy said, well, are you planning to have a baby anytime soon? You see, and a man would never be asked such a question, because if she was willing to have a child soon, then she's not going to be employed. Saying, oh, that's disruptive, and then we have to go on maternity leave, and we have to pay you a bit anyway. I know the government pays some of it, but, you know, it ruins relationships with clients. A man who has a child, he's not going to take a year off work, very unlikely. Women experience sexual harassment at work, so that's a problem too, can make them want to leave. So that's why they don't get so much career progression. So such measures have worked. You could look at Sweden, which has got almost 50% of women in its legislature, and has got high proportions of women in all sorts of occupations. You could look at the most gender unequal societies in the world, such as Saudi Arabia, such as places like Nigeria or Afghanistan, and they tend to be very undeveloped, have suffered severe problems, even if they have mineral resources. So women tend to be less aggressive, and less testosterone is a good thing. Having an excess of testosterone leads to these ludicrously chauvinistic and macho attitudes, posturing, to excessive risk-taking, the kind of thing that causes financial crashes, boys showing off to each other. So that's why it's essential that we introduce quotas for women in particular occupations. And let me go over again why it's vital that we introduce this long overdue measure, because it will end gender discrimination, because we desperately need to benefit from women's gifts, because the so-called free market is not free and shall not be free until we intervene. And last of all, because it's proven to work. It'll make life better for everyone, men and women alike. And for those reasons, I urge you to support this motion. Right, so anyway, now we go on to the opposition side. So imagining that Madam President has introduced me. Right, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I thank the other member for his tremendous oration, and I'm also grateful to him for the numerous lacunae in his speech, which I now tend to exploit. But before I rebut his many mistakes, I shall set out my stall. I am utterly opposed to this obloquial motion for a number of reasons. Because he wants to discriminate. That's number one. Second of all, it will certainly fail. Third of all, it's grossly unfair that he says nothing about men being discriminated against. And last of all, it exposes the nonsense by the liberal left who proposed this measure, who claim gender doesn't even exist. So let me go through them one by one. First of all, it is flagrantly unfair. We want justice, I hear him say. All right, I do. But that doesn't mean that abilities are equal. It doesn't mean that gifts are distributed equally between both genders. Take engineering. Why is it something like 90% of engineers are men? No, it's not the patriarchy. It's not some nefarious conspiracy by males who wish to deprive women of what they want to do, because more men than women are better at it by a long shot. All right? It's no mystery, like more women are better than men at languages. Nobody disputes that. It's an evidenceless proposition. He starts from the presumption that talent in all areas of achievement are distributed the same to men and women, and there's no particular reason to believe that. In fact, there's a mountain of evidence to disbelieve it. So the studies are superabundant which show that men are more inclined to certain areas of attainment and women to others. Now, this comes into the whole nature and nurture debate, and now I realise that nurture does play a role, but you shouldn't deny that nature is there as well. It's just like IQ, or some people are cleverer than others, all right? Girls start talking younger than boys. That's not a female conspiracy. It's just because women, on the whole, have a greater ability for linguistic development. Men tend to have a higher aptitude in other areas. Tend to. There are exemptions. We're talking about the overall pattern, right? Correlation is not predestination. There are some people who buck the trend. So the wish to do these different jobs is not equal. Yes, more women want to work in the caring professions like medicine, teaching, nursing, and so forth. More men go into the things in financial services, which are hyper-competitive, which are also seen as very stressful and requiring a measure of aggression and ruthlessness. Right, let me explain why his policy would be foredoomed to failure if it were implemented. Women would then be forced into jobs they don't want to do. What if you can't get women to meet this arbitrary quota of 40%? So the roles are to go unfilled, so we're not going to have enough people working in insurance or banking or whatever. So the whole system would collapse. Or we have to put a woman into the role even if she is substandard. And we can't sack her because that would be gender discriminatory. So even if it crashes the bank, we've got to keep her there. So this is flagrantly unfair. It's irrational and moronic. So women can't be forced to do jobs that they don't wish to do any more than men can. And if they underperform, they're not to be removed. This is preposterous social engineering. Is it completely ideologically driven? Where did we get that figure of 40%, by the way? That was just plucked from the air. Anyway, so men and women have different priorities, and no amount of social engineering can vitiate people's natural inclination. So women tend to be more honest, which is why they work in certain occupations, not so much being the shysters and snake oil salesmen of financial services or politics. They tend to emphasize family and friends more than men do, maybe less competitive, and that's a laudable thing. Because men were more likely to be merciless and competitive. I've got more money than you've got. Status anxiety, like a sport, scoring points, having tons of money but no time to enjoy it. Or perhaps women are wiser in knowing what's really important in life and seeking greater happiness. So what we don't hear about is male sacrifice, men working longer hours in extraordinarily stressful jobs. Perhaps not so many women would want these pressurizing jobs. You talked about fertility. Well, most women have a child or two in their lives and take maternity leave, and yes, that does interfere with certain occupations. The financial services, they need to keep relationships going with the client. Taking a few months or even a year off is really going to disrupt that. So it's a choice that people have got to make. It's not as disruptive as it used to be because, as I say, some women have fewer children. All right, we don't object to men taking paternity leave instead, to splitting the parental leave. Now, this strikes at the heart of the illogic and injustice of the preposterous proposal from the other side of the House. Why not for men? It's a bloqueal that he wishes to address so-called discrimination against females, but not against males. Men are something like 95% of the prison population. Is that gender discrimination? Of course not. It's because they commit more crime. He's not comparing like with like. Male and female behaviour is not identical. Far from it. Though there is some overlap, the behaviour on the whole is distinctly different. So we didn't hear him addressing this. Let's hear it for the boys. Why do girls outperform boys in almost every school subject? Again, is that some sort of terrible conspiracy by a female cabal? I don't think so. It's because girls tend to be brainier and harder working in many subjects. Men die sooner. Is it because women are killing them? No. I mean, according to his rationale, it would be. So if the gender outcomes are different, that must be because of discrimination or something like that. It can't be due to different behaviour. This is ridiculous. He's overlooking the elephant in the living room, which is choices. People, on the whole, making different choices according to their gender. So worse outcomes for men, or worse exam results and so forth, are not because that someone's ganging up on them. Men tend to work in these more pressurizing jobs, which is why they may well be less happy, commit suicide at a much greater rate, and die younger. So men are much more likely to be killed in a war. Funnily enough, he didn't apply this quota to the armed forces. All right, so does gender even exist? His proposal is the sort of drivel we often hear from the liberal left and cultural Marxists that we have to discriminate. No discrimination is fair. It's always unfair. There can be no exceptions on this. So his bigotry is poisonous. But people like him are always saying that gender doesn't even exist. That we're gender fluid. A man can call himself a woman can call himself a man. We can shift back and forward and shape shift just by calling yourself whatever you want to call yourself and enforcing everyone else calling you this, saying they must use my preferred gender pronoun. This is madness, literally madness. So if this lunacy is true, why do we even care who's a man, who's a woman? All right, we can easily achieve his objective by getting men in whatever sector to simply call themselves women. They can still dress the same way, behave exactly the same way, keep the same name, just say, call me she or whatever, and then it's a magic bullet. It exposes what absolute nonsense this is. It's part of the transgender fallacy. He's absolutely fixated with gender at the same time claiming that it doesn't exist. There's a conundrum here. These two propositions can't possibly both be true. First of all, that there is gender discrimination. Second of all, that there is no such thing as gender. If gender is extant, then say so and stop saying that we can switch back and forth between the genders. So it's like an emperor's new clothes thing. A toddler could tell you who's a girl and who's a boy, but it would seem that a liberal leftist cannot. So let me go over yet again the reasons why this dreadful and illogical motion must be rejected by the House. Because it is blatantly unfair, because it is certain to fail, because it does nothing for men or indeed for women, and because it is linked to this absurd notion that there's no such thing as gender. Gender does exist, and it leads to different behaviour and therefore different outcomes. And that is why I plead the House to vote down this motion.